Somewhere along the way, you learned to make yourself smaller. Not all at once, not in a single moment you can point to and say, there. That is when it happened. It came gradually, the way most important things come. Through 1,000 small corrections, 1,000 quiet signals from a world that had very particular ideas about how much space you were allowed to take up, how loudly you were permitted to have needs, how often your preferences were supposed to override everyone else's comfort. And somewhere in the accumulation of all of that, you developed a habit, a reflex so automatic you no longer notice it happening. You apologize, constantly, reflexively, and for things that require no apology whatsoever. You apologize for being tired, for saying no, for moving more slowly than you once did, for needing things, for having opinions, for taking up time, for existing in certain rooms, at a certain volume, at a certain age, in ways that have apparently become inconvenient to the people around you. I want to talk about this today because I believe it matters far more than it is usually given credit for. Not as a matter of etiquette, not as a matter of self-esteem in the soft, abstract way those conversations tend to go, but as a matter of identity, of health, of what the years ahead of you are actually going to feel like from the inside, depending on whether you spend them continuing to apologize for things that deserve no apology, or whether you finally, deliberately, and without dramatic announcement, simply stop. There are 7 specific things that people over 65 apologize for constantly and should stop apologizing for immediately. Not someday, not once they feel more certain about it. Now, the moment you finish listening to this, because you have earned that right, in ways you have never once been told clearly enough. And it is long past time someone told you. The first thing you need to stop apologizing for the moment you turn 65 is moving at your own pace. Think about how many times in a given week you say some version of sorry for this. Sorry for taking a moment at the top of the stairs. Sorry for asking the cashier to wait while you find the right card. Sorry for driving the speed limit when someone behind you wants you to drive faster. Sorry for needing a moment to think before you answer. Sorry for walking with deliberate care instead of the careless speed that younger bodies take for granted. Every one of those apologies contains a hidden assumption that the pace of your body is an imposition on the world, that the tempo of your life should be calibrated to everyone else's schedule rather than to what is actually appropriate for you. And you have been making that assumption for so long and apologizing based on it so automatically that you may have stopped noticing how extraordinary it is that you apologize for something as fundamental and unchosen as the speed at which your body moves through the world. Here is what I want you to understand about this. The speed at which you move right now is not a failure. It is information. It is your body communicating with the honesty that only years of use can produce exactly what it needs. The person who rushes you at the pharmacy counter has 30 more years before they understand what you understand. The driver behind you has a decade or 2 left before they drive the way you drive. Not because slowing down is defeat, because slowing down is wisdom wearing a body. There is a reason every culture in human history that has lasted long enough to develop one has held its elders in a kind of reverence that modern Western life has largely lost. Not out of pity, out of understanding that the person who has lived the longest has earned the right to move through the world on their own terms. You carry that right. Start acting like it. The second thing you need to stop apologizing for is saying no without a reason. This one is harder than the first because most people over 65 were raised inside a social framework that treated no as inherently aggressive unless it was immediately followed by a softening explanation. No, but here is why. No, I am so sorry, I would if I could, but no, unfortunately, I have this other obligation that unfortunately prevents me from. And somewhere in the middle of all that softening and explaining, The actual no gets lost or reversed entirely, and you end up saying yes to something you did not want to do because the social pressure of justifying a refusal felt heavier than simply giving in. No is a complete sentence. It has been a complete sentence your entire life. You were simply never given clear permission to treat it as one. The author Anne Lamott, who has written about the freedom that comes with age with more honesty than almost anyone, has said that no is a full sentence, and it is almost holy. And I believe that, because every unnecessary yes you say is a corresponding no to something that genuinely deserved your time. Every social obligation you attend out of guilt is an afternoon you did not spend doing something you actually wanted to do. Every family gathering you endured in exhausted compliance is energy your body spent that your body did not have to give and was not given back. After 65, your time is no longer theoretical. It is not the abstract future resource it once felt like when retirement was still somewhere ahead and there seemed to be enough years to absorb any amount of waste. It is now, this week, these particular hours on this particular afternoon. And what you say yes and no to is not a matter of manners. It is a matter of what your life actually contains in the time that remains. No, without elaboration, without apology, without the exhausting performance of regret for a boundary that you were entirely entitled to set. That is not rudeness. That is the clearest possible form of self-knowledge expressed out loud. The third thing you need to stop apologizing for is your appearance. Not in the way that sounds. I am not talking about confidence or self-acceptance in the motivational sense. I am talking about something more specific and more immediate. I am talking about the apology that lives underneath the way many people over 65 dress, groom, present themselves, and talk about their own bodies. A running commentary of self-diminishment so habitual it has become a form of background noise. The comment about the weight that appeared after 60 and refuses to leave. The self-deprecating remark about the hair that is not what it once was. The apology for the hearing aid, for the reading glasses, for the cane, for the sensible shoes, for the clothes chosen for comfort rather than to perform a certain kind of youthfulness that was always going to become impossible to maintain. You apologize for looking your age in a culture that has decided aging is something to be corrected, concealed, or at minimum, apologized for. And that is one of the most revealing things about the world you grew up in. Not that it valued youth, which every culture does to some degree, but that it decided the visible signs of a long life were something a person should be embarrassed to display. The actress and author Jane Fonda, who has spoken about aging with a frankness that many people find surprising given how central her career was built on a particular physical ideal, has said that the most radical thing an older woman can do in this culture is let herself be seen as she actually is, not performing youth, not apologizing for its absence, simply being visibly, honestly, the age she is. That radicalism should not be radical at all. A face that carries 70 years should not require an apology. A body that has worked for 6 decades, survived what it has survived, carried what it has carried, and is still here and still functioning deserves something much closer to reverence than embarrassment. You did not fail to remain young. You succeeded in becoming old. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. The fourth thing you need to stop apologizing for is repeating yourself. Before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge that this one comes with nuance. There are contexts in which repetition is a genuine symptom of something worth monitoring, and attention to those patterns is sensible and important. But I am not talking about that. I am talking about the ordinary, universal human experience of telling a story you have told before, of returning to an idea that has mattered to you for years, of sharing a memory that shaped you with someone who may or may not have heard it the previous time. The apology attached to this is immediate and reflexive in most people over 65. I know I have told you this before. Sorry, You have probably heard this. Stop me if I have already said this. And sometimes these disclaimers are followed by the story anyway, and sometimes they are followed by the person choosing not to tell it, editing themselves out of their own conversation based on the preemptive shame of possible repetition. Here is what those apologies assume. They assume that a story told twice has lost its value, that a memory shared again is a lesser thing than a memory shared for the first time, that the measure of a story's worth is novelty rather than meaning. But think about the stories that have mattered most in your own life, the ones that were told to you by someone older than you, a grandparent, a parent, someone who had lived something significant and wanted you to know it. Did those stories lose their power the second time? Did the repetition hollow them out? Or did the repetition mean something else entirely? That this was important enough to say again, that this was something the teller needed you to hear, that this experience was real and lasting and worth more than a single mention? Your stories are yours. Your memories are yours. The repetition of them is not a malfunction. It is often simply evidence of what has mattered most. Stop prefacing it with an apology and tell the story the way it deserves to be told. The fifth thing you need to stop apologizing for is needing help. This one tends to arrive with a particular weight because the people who find it hardest to ask for help are almost always the people who spent the most years being the ones other people turned to. The capable ones, the reliable ones, the ones who sorted things out and held things together and handled whatever needed handling without making it anyone else's problem. And for those people, and you may be among them, asking for help does not feel like a neutral act. It feels like a confession, like evidence of a diminishment they have been hoping to conceal. There are seniors who will quietly struggle with a jar lid for 10 minutes rather than ask someone in the house to open it. There are people who will avoid mentioning a symptom to a doctor because they do not want to seem like they are complaining. There are people who navigate technology they do not understand, get lost in places they cannot easily ask directions, and manage pain they have not told anyone about, because the alternative is saying out loud that they need something. And saying that, after decades of being the person who provides, feels like giving something up that they are not ready to surrender. But interdependence is not weakness. It never was. The stoic self-sufficiency that your generation was taught to admire, the idea that a strong person handles things alone and keeps their needs quiet, is not a virtue. It is a story. A useful one, perhaps, in certain contexts and certain times of life, but a story nonetheless. And it is a story that has kept a significant number of people quietly suffering rather than asking for the help that was available to them all along. Brené Brown, whose research on vulnerability at the University of Houston produced findings that upended decades of conventional psychological thinking, found consistently that the ability to ask for and receive help is not a sign of weakness, but of connection, and that the people who could not ask were not stronger than those who could. They were simply more isolated in their struggle. Isolation is not strength. It is just loneliness in a more socially acceptable costume. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to say so clearly, and you are allowed to receive what is offered without immediately calculating how you are going to repay it. The sixth thing you need to stop apologizing for is your feelings, the inconvenient ones especially, grief that does not resolve on a schedule that is comfortable for the people around you, anger at things that genuinely deserve to be angered about, fear that is honest rather than managed, sadness about losses that were real and significant, and that do not get smaller simply because enough time has passed for other people to expect them to. There is enormous pressure on people over 65 to perform a particular emotional register: contentment, gratitude, gentle good humor, the warm equanimity of someone who has made peace with everything. And while those feelings are real and deserve their place, they are not the whole of a human emotional life and the demand that they be. The implicit expectation that at your age you should be beyond the sharper and less comfortable feelings is its own particular form of erasure. You are allowed to be angry that you lost someone you loved before you were ready to lose them. You are allowed to grieve the version of your life that did not happen. You are allowed to feel afraid about what is coming, whatever it is you see coming, rather than maintaining the serene acceptance that sometimes seems to be the only emotional state that aging people are given full social permission to express. The psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote that the one freedom no external circumstance can remove from a human being is the freedom to choose one's own attitude. That is true. But choosing your attitude is not the same as concealing your actual feelings behind the attitude someone else has decided would be more appropriate. Your emotions are not a performance to be calibrated for the comfort of your audience. They are information, they are yours, and they deserve the same dignity you would extend, without question, to the feelings of someone 40 years younger. Stop apologizing for the feelings that are inconvenient. Feel them honestly, name them clearly, give them the space they require, and leave the performance of contentment for occasions when contentment is something you are actually experiencing. The seventh thing you need to stop apologizing for, and perhaps the one that contains all the others inside it, is taking up space. This is the deepest one. The one that underlies the apology for your pace and your no and your appearance and your stories and your needs and your feelings, the quiet, pervasive, rarely examined belief that at 65, at 70, at 75 and beyond, you are somehow more of a burden than a presence, more of a cost than a contribution, more in the way than at the center of things where you have always belonged. That belief did not come from nowhere. It was constructed by a culture with a very particular relationship to age and utility, a culture that measures value primarily in productivity and economic output, and that has never quite worked out what to do with the people who have moved past the phase of life in which those metrics apply most cleanly. And because that culture is the water most of us have always swum in, its assumptions absorbed quietly, without debate, into the way many older people understand their own worth. But your worth was never contained in your productivity. It was never located in how much you could lift, or how fast you could move, or how many hours you could work without complaint. It lived in who you are, the particular, irreplaceable, still present and still functioning person who has now lived longer than most, who has seen more than most, who has failed and recovered and loved and lost and built and begun again in ways that cannot be measured in any unit that a productivity culture has ever devised. The writer and philosopher Florida Scott Maxwell, who wrote her most celebrated work at the age of 85, said that you need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours, not to justify them, not to apologize for them, simply to claim them, to acknowledge that they happened to you and that you survived them and that the person who survived them is standing here still, worthy of space, worthy of being seen, worthy of the full, unqualified presence of every year still remaining. You are not a footnote in your own story. You are not the background character who has wandered into someone else's more important narrative. You are still the main character of the only life that belongs entirely to you. So stop making yourself smaller. Stop preemptively diminishing your needs, your pace, your appearance, your stories, your emotions, and your right to simply be present in the rooms you enter. Stop apologizing for the evidence of a long life as though length were an embarrassment rather than an achievement. The apologies were never actually required. They were habits, reflexes, the residue of a lifetime spent absorbing a world that did not always know what to do with you, and that, at a certain point, you began to accommodate rather than challenge. Challenge it now, not aggressively, not with performances of defiance that would exhaust you and accomplish very little, simply by choosing, one small, deliberate moment at a time, to stop shrinking. to occupy your chair at the table without qualification, to finish your sentence, to tell your story, to need what you need and name it clearly, to feel what you feel without immediately reaching for the apology that your feelings do not owe anyone. You turned 65. That is not a diminishment. That is the beginning of the only chapter in which you have finally, fully, completely earned the right to be exactly who you are, without apology, without explanation, without the exhausting performance of making yourself easier for everyone else to accommodate. You are not too much. You have never been too much. The world simply needed to grow up enough to hold you properly. Give it the chance. Stop apologizing and take up every inch of the space that has always rightfully been yours.